So, how digital currency is rewiring our money mindset. I've had the most interesting week since our conversation last Monday with my good friend Natalie MacNeil, where we talked about the future of money and AI. My messages have been going crazy, not actually with like technical questions about crypto or Bitcoin or AI, but actually some very interesting questions that centered around the feeling and the mindset around investing in currencies and digital platforms that maybe we don't understand, or feeling like this lack of safety. Like, how do I actually feel safe putting money in something that I can't physically hold or physically see? What if I mess everything up? What if I lose everything? How do I know whether to trust these platforms when all I've been taught is banks are the safe option, right? Some really interesting reflections from last week's episode. So I thought I would record one today that dives a little bit deeper into some of the pieces that we talked about on last week's show, and also answer some questions, not necessarily about cryptocurrency specifically, although I am going to talk a little bit about what digital currencies actually are for those of you who might be just going into this learning experience. But I really want to dive into some questions about trust, about safety, about completely rewiring how our brains actually think about money. And honestly, that's exactly what I think we should be talking about, because we are living through one of the biggest transformations in how humans relate to money since we moved away from the gold standards. And whilst everybody's talking about technology, blockchain, crypto wallets, exchanges, AI, hardly anyone is actually talking about the massive psychological shifts that this requires. Your nervous system was literally designed to equate safety with things that you can physically see, physically touch, and can control. And for thousands of years, wealth meant land that you could walk on and gold that you could hold, or livestock that you could count. And now we're asking our brains to value numbers on a screen that exist in something that is cloud based, right? So no wonder it feels overwhelming. Maybe we are doubting whether this is the right way to be investing. Maybe you've completely disregarded it. And I was having a conversation just last night with a financial advisor who was like, no, I'm not even looking at that, because they've grown up with that very historic traditional view of investing. And I'll be really honest, this was me up until maybe like 18 months, 2 years ago, where I really started to educate myself about digital currencies. And the more I've immersed myself in those pieces, the more I've actually discovered that I have had to do a whole load of unlearning. And so I feel like today's episode is going to be a whole load of unlearning for all of us. But I want it to be also interesting for you to consider, right? Just to consider. So we're going to dive deep into the mindset shifts required, whether you're already investing in digital currencies or whether you're still trying to wrap your head around what a digital wallet even is. I'll be talking about that today, understanding some of the emotional landscape that is really, really important. And we're going to explore why this feels so different from traditional investing, how to navigate the trust issues that might be coming up, and how to build confidence in yourself as we move into this new financial paradigm. So go grab a cuppa, get comfortable. Let's talk about rewiring your money mindset for the digital age. So, what I find interesting is to think about this physical versus digital money mindset, right? And so our brains are hardwired to equate real money with tangible things, something that we can physically hold, we can count it, we can store it in a safe place. This is why us Brits love property investing, because it's bricks and mortar. Our parents were big investors in properties, whereas in the US, as a comparable, like, they don't see their houses in the same way. And certainly the millennials of the next generations are renting everything. They're not even interested in holding physical property. And I think that is an important shift that we are experiencing. And if you think about digital currencies are asking us to place value in maths, like mathematics, and in community consensus rather than government, which represents a really big like shift in how humans have thought about wealth for many, many years. So, what are digital currencies? So, for those of you who might be on the start of your journey and you're thinking, what the hell is this all about? Well, before we dive into the mindset piece, let me just quickly explain what we're really talking about when we say digital currencies, because I know some of you might be thinking, I don't even know what Bitcoin is. I had this conversation with my brother in law over Christmas, and Gareth and I, my husband and I, looked at each other and we were like, how do we explain this in a really simple way for someone who is just learning about this? And it was a challenge. It was difficult to understand and explain. But when I think about digital currencies, I think of them like this. So instead of physical coins or notes that you carry in your purse or your wallet, a digital currency is essentially numbers that are stored on a huge shared computer network, right? But unlike numbers that you might see in your bank account, which your bank controls, the numbers are verified and they're protected by thousands of computers all around the world working together. So it's like having like thousands of witnesses confirming that, yes, you do own this money, rather than just trusting one bank to keep records of what you hold with them, right? And Bitcoin is probably the one that you've heard of. It's like digital gold. It's limited in supply. There's only so much of it. And once that's been issued, that's it. And it's designed to hold value. So there are other currencies like Ethereum, which is more like a digital platform where you can build applications and communities. But the key is to understand that they're not controlled by any government or any bank. They're controlled by mathematics and community, right? Which is exactly why they feel so different to our traditional money mindset. Because right now, like, you may have a strong foundation with money, but it takes some time for our brain to get around this concept that, so we don't own it, so who owns it? like it is a really big mindset shift. And I think this goes right back to the fact that, the primal need is that as human beings, we need something tangible. We need physical coins, notes. Even the generations of my grandparents, for example, like, it took them a long time to even talk to them about, like, put your money in the bank, it's safe, right? Because they would just stitch it in the bottom of their curtains. Like, I remember going to see a client at their home when I was a financial advisor, and she had money in her curtains because she was like, I'm not giving it to the bank. I don't trust the banks. Right. And some of you might also not trust the banks for various reasons, which we'll talk about later. And for some of you, you might be thinking, well, if I can't hold it, I don't own it, and so that doesn't feel safe in our nervous system. And this mirrors other digital shifts that we are already seeing and have already seen. So if you think about the digital methods or shifts that you've already been through, like online banking. Do you remember when we didn't have online banking? Do you remember when we used to write checks out? Do you remember when we used to have to fax legal documentation? Now everything is about online banking, contactless payments. My kids don't even really carry cash, very rarely. Like, it's such a digital shift that we have been through in the last 10 to 20 years. But there's also a really big generational divide, and it's fascinating to watch how different generations approach this. Like, my 11-year-old son, he's got about £850 sitting in his Starling savings pot, right? Accumulation of like birthday money and Christmas money. And he's a saver. Like he doesn't like spending money at all. And when he heard Gareth and I on one of our recent money dates talking about Bitcoin and crypto, he was so interested in it, more interested than any other money conversation that he's probably overheard. And we do have a lot of open money conversations in our house. I think it's really important to do that. And so he wanted to set up his own digital wallet. And so we actually talked him through the whole process. And to him, money exists on a phone. Like that's just completely normal for him because he's grown up with everything being digital. Whereas I've got clients that I look after in their 50s and 60s who still prefer to see their bank statements printed on paper. And there's nothing wrong with either approach, but it really shows us how our relationship with technology shapes our comfort with digital money. And so if you grew up trusting banks and handling physical cash, well, of course, blockchain is going to feel foreign. But if you've grown up trusting apps and cloud storage, then digital currencies are going to feel like a really natural evolution with money. And some people actually feel more secure with crypto, knowing that it can't be seized by the banks, it can't be seized by governments, especially given some of the financial crisis that we've experienced in our lifetime. Right? So there is what I would kind of describe as this great trust transfer going on. And let's be honest about where we've been placing our trust with money. For decades, we've been told that banks are the safe option. Put your money there. They'll look after it. It's government guaranteed. But then 2008 happened and we watched entire banks collapse overnight. And more recently, we've seen banks like the Silicon Valley Bank fail, and suddenly people's lives and savings have been at risk. And then government-backed currencies, well, during COVID alone, trillions of pounds were printed, which completely diluted the value of every single pound in your bank account. And there's a real uncomfortable truth in that we have been trusting institutions that have let us down, but yet we still feel like they're the safer place than trusting ourselves, which is a bit mad when you think about it, isn't it? Now, I'm not saying like go take all your money out of the banks because they're not safe, but it is a psychological shift. And I do think that the future of money is this evolution where we are going to be a decentralized nation. And so there will be more trust required. There will be more focus on how we feel about our relationship to holding money ourselves, not having to give that responsibility to the banks or the building societies. And I think we are being called to make this massive shift from the bank will look after my money to I am my own bank, right? I am the steward of money. And immediately, those inner critics are going to pipe up and say, well, I'm not smart enough for this. Oh, well, I'm definitely going to mess that up then. Well, that's too risky. And it's quite ironic, right? When we think that trusting ourselves with our money is riskier than trusting institutions that have literally failed us, right? And here's what's different about digital currencies. So instead of trusting one central authority, you're trusting a community. Every single transaction is recorded permanently on blockchain. Like blockchain is like a platform, it's like a supermarket, right? Which means that it's completely transparent. There's no hidden fees, there's no secret decisions being made in boardrooms, and instead of the bank deciding what happens to your money, thousands of computers around the world are verifying transactions. So you're not just trusting yourself, you're trusting mathematics and community consensus, which historically has proven far more reliable than any single institution. So it is interesting. There's interesting shifts happening, but there is a lot of trust involved, and I speak about this from my own experience of, well, do I trust that this is going to be the future of money? And I'm going to talk about like some small steps and things that you could consider and contemplate towards the end of this episode. But one of the things that I spoke about on last Monday's show, which if you haven't listened to yet, please go and immerse yourself in that 1 hour episode with Natalie MacNeil. It was really interesting talking about money and AI. And one of the things that Natalie spoke about was Richard Rudd's analogy of the dragonfly. And if you haven't heard of Richard Rudd, I recorded a previous podcast episode on Gene Keys, which is Richard Rudd's like life's work. It's one of the most beautiful program experiences I've ever experienced. And I very briefly mentioned about his analogy of the pearl. And speaking of transformation, this shift from like institutional control to community trust really reminded me of what Richard Rudd writes about in the Gene Keys about the symbolism of the pearl. And I think understanding what a pearl represents can help us make sense of this entire transformation that we are going through with money. So let me share this with you because it's genuinely shifted how I think about the whole digital currency movement. So these are literally notes from my journal that I am now reading out to you that I made from when I was going through the Pearl sequence, which is one of the courses in Gene Keys. And in my journal, I actually have a photograph of my pearl necklace, which I'm currently wearing. If you're watching this on video, I have a pearl necklace which my husband bought me for our 10th wedding anniversary. That the pearl is the 10th symbolism of the number 10. And as I was going through this pearl sequence, I was like I looked at the mirror and I looked at my necklace and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the future of money. And let me just explain why I thought that. So when you think about the pearl and the significance of the pearl is a real feminine metaphor for prosperity. It's born from pressure, not perfection. So the pearl actually forms when an irritant, like a grain of sand, enters an oyster. And the oyster slowly coats it with layers of nacre. I don't know how you pronounce it. Nacre, I think it is. And over time, the friction becomes something that forms this beautiful and very valuable pearl. And when I think about the meaning of that in comparison to wealth doesn't always come from ease. It comes from responding with grace to what irritates or challenges us. Right? Think about the number of businesses that have been created from a challenge or a pain point that we've experienced ourselves. This reminds me of Sir Richard Branson's story, where the whole reason he launched Virgin Airlines was because he was stuck in an airport, couldn't get from one place to another, and walked around the airport with a billboard saying, would you jump on this private airline jet for like $30 or something, I think it was, or $300. And he managed to get like 30 people together. And then that's how Virgin was created, the idea of Virgin. And so just like our relationship with money, the pearl doesn't reject the discomfort. Like it doesn't reject the sand and things that's irritating it. It transforms it. And true prosperity is often the result of transmuting through difficult times into something really beautiful. And something just really landed for me when I considered that. And the other thing with pearls is that they are associated with divine wisdom. So in Greek mythology, they're connected to Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. And so in your world, the pearl is a real sacred union to be valued. And for a woman, it's a real source of abundance. You know, when we wear pearls, I mean, for guys too, but you don't tend to see men wearing pearls as much as for women. And so I just thought that analogy really shows us that we're not a victim of money, that right now you might feel stuck, but it's about thinking differently. It's about seeing things differently. The pearl is about clear purpose. It's not necessarily thinking, it's this inner knowing. and having this clear thinking. So how does this relate to money? Well, our current financial systems might be irritating as we look into the future. There's irritations around financial inequality. Inflation is an irritation. Bank fees are irritations, and they are creating a huge amount of pressure for change. And digital currencies are the pearl. They're transforming financial friction into something beautiful, but it will take time. Like pearls, this change will take time and the right conditions. We need to build more education around these conversations, build community, build trust in ourselves. And we're moving definitely away from this old paradigm of, hoarding everything for ourselves to this new paradigm of community and shared values. So if we're growing our own financial pearls, we're transforming the irritation of our current, quite broken systems into something really valuable. So I hope you enjoyed that little analogy. But I really do believe that we can now start to think about, well, I get it. There are some mindset shifts, some psychological shifts for us to be making together. So then how do we move this into some practical steps to start building confidence in this new future of money? Well, the first thing I think is education, is building your confidence and education with digital currencies. And so I started reading everything I could get my hands on, and Natalie's suggestion in the episode last week about using AI to create your own personalized learning course is brilliant. You can literally ask ChatGPT, Claude, to build you a beginner's guide that's tailored to your specific situation. You could go in and create a prompt like, act as a future of money digital currency expert. Create a beginner's guide for me to really understand the basics and foundations of digital currencies and how I could consider investing a small allocation into my investment portfolio. And so I began in this way using AI, and I uploaded into my AI project what my current allocation was in my investment portfolio. So I was looking at my pensions, I was looking at my investment portfolios, I included my angel investments, individual shareholdings that I have. And I just started off a conversation about, well, how could I begin to just shift maybe like 2 or 3% of my overall asset allocation into crypto? And that's how I got started. Some of my pension platforms don't offer digital currencies, so I wasn't able to shift any of that into those spaces. But with my regular contributions every month, those were where I started to move more of my allocation towards. And it's been an experience. There's definitely been times where I'm like, oh, is this the right thing to do? Is this safe? But I think the more you educate yourself around these platforms, the more trust you'll build in taking that knowledge and making a decision for yourself, right? And unfortunately, I do think that this isn't necessarily something you can just go and speak to your financial advisor about, because most financial advisors won't be talking about this, or they might be, but they can't actually give you regulated advice, right? Because it's not a regulated investment. So again, that puts fear into us, right? That, well, if my financial advisor's not telling me to do it, then I shouldn't be doing it. But in reality, and I don't mean this in any detriment to financial advisors, but financial advisors are governed by their own internal compliance. And so they're not going to be able to give you a basket recommendation, but they will be having conversations with you about, well, this is maybe something to consider, and talking to you about the risks and the overall asset allocation in your investment portfolios. So definitely raise the conversation with your advisors. And if you're an advisor listening to this, I'd be really curious to know what your thoughts are on how you are potentially building in the future of money into your client review conversations. I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had in here. If you are interested, by the way, in learning more about like how you create AI prompts and how you could go and create this AI course for yourself to educate, I would really highly recommend that you go and check out Natalie MacNeil's AI course. It's specifically built to help entrepreneurs to create their AI dream team. But you'll learn so much from how to go about creating projects on AI that it will give you everything that you need to know. And also she has an amazing newsletter, which gives you like some recommended prompts and things to use. So I'll pop a link in the show notes to Natalie's course. I am a partner with Natalie, so I do potentially receive a little affiliate commission if you decide to purchase her course. But I have been through the course myself. I would never recommend anything that I haven't done myself, but just for complete transparency. So that's definitely something to consider. And my husband and I have regular conversations about this. We've been talking to our youngest about this. And I do think that when you take a step back, if you have decades of traditional banking conditioning, which many of us do, that's the first step, is to really think about deconditioning. What deconditioning do we need to overcome? And it's quite liberating to see money through fresh eyes. And with my son, he doesn't have any of that conditioning, right? So the key is starting small enough that if something goes wrong, you can sleep at night, but big enough that you're genuinely learning. So think of it like any other skill. You wouldn't expect to be brilliant at piano after one lesson. So don't expect to feel completely comfortable with digital currencies immediately. But I do think that learning more about this subject is something to dive into. My book, It's Not About the Money, is a great foundational money mindset course, money mindset piece of work. And you can grab a free copy of that on my website, catherinemorgan.com. My investing course as well is great if you want to dive into some of the practical steps for portfolio building. And that course is very specifically designed for beginner investors. I'll pop a link to that in the show notes, but it's catherinemorgan.com/get-investing-course, catherinemorgan.com/get-investing-course. And I'll pop a discount code in the show notes where you can get 50% off as a podcast listener using the code INVEST500OFF 2024. Sorry, it's INVEST50 off 2024. So 50% off, INVEST50 off 2024. So as a recap, as we close off this episode, I really do believe that this is about trust, not technology. This is about giving yourself permission to get started to learn and learn gradually. This isn't something that has to be done as a marathon, but I would definitely put it on your money date as something to consider over the coming weeks. And every decision that we make does require a leap of faith. Everything that is new to us, our nervous system has to feel safe. So it will take time for your body to feel safe to adjust to this, just like you did with online banking, if you remember those days. So we're not just changing how we hold on to wealth, we're really changing who we become in relationship to it. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I'll see you again on the show next Monday. Take care, guys.